Why is a continent of 1.4 billion people, with some of the fastest growing economies in the world, lagging behind in what might be the most important technological shift of our time? Well, I'm glad you asked. So let's break it down. This is the harsh truth about Africa's AI struggles and why the country is getting left behind in the AI revolution. Like most problems the continent faces, the first culprit is infrastructure, or the lack of it. You see, AI isn't just about coding in a basement. It needs raw computing power, supercomputers, high-speed internet, stable electricity. Meanwhile, in many parts of Africa, a 10-minute YouTube video still buffers like it's loading from the Stone Age. And power outages, let's not even start. Training a machine learning model when your electricity cuts out every few hours is like trying to run a marathon in flip-flops. Next, let's talk about money. AI research isn't cheap. The US and China are throwing billions at AI. Meanwhile, African governments are struggling to fund basic education, let alone billion-dollar research labs. Private sector? Well, when investors hear Africa, they think fintech, e-commerce, maybe agriculture tech. AI, not exactly a hot topic in boardrooms. Then there's education. AI talent doesn't just appear out of thin air. It requires years of training in advanced mathematics, computer science, and data analysis. But here's the problem. Africa's best and brightest don't stay in Africa. They get scholarships to the US, Canada, Europe, and never look back. The brain drain is real. Name no mistake about it. Africa is absolutely producing AI talent. It's just that the AI talent is producing results for Silicon Valley, not for Africa. And we haven't even talked about data. AI needs data like humans need oxygen. And Africa? It's a data desert. In places like the US and China, governments and companies have been collecting mountains of data for decades. In Africa, many industries still rely on paper records. And when data does exist, it's often scattered, incomplete, or locked away by governments and corporations who don't know what to do with it. But let's say, against all odds, an African startup manages to build an AI product. What happens next? Well, they have to compete with tech giants like Google and OpenAI, who have more computing power in one server room than the entire continent. And even if they somehow succeed, they'll likely get bought out or crushed before they can scale. But despite all of this, there has to be a concerted effort to try. Because if Africa doesn't catch up, the consequences won't just be bad, they'll be catastrophic. Let's talk about jobs. AI is automating industries at a terrifying speed. In developed countries, workers are struggling to adapt to AI-powered automation. But in Africa, where many industries are still labor-intensive, automation could hit like a wrecking ball. Factories, agriculture, banking, entire sectors could see millions of jobs vanish overnight. And unlike in the West, there's no social safety net to catch people when that happens. Then there's economic dependency. AI isn't just about robots and chatbots. It's about who controls the global economy. If Africa remains a consumer of AI instead of a producer, it will be permanently locked into a position of dependence. Imagine a future where every financial system, healthcare service, and business operation is controlled by AI models made in the US or China. Africa would have zero control over its own economy. Geopolitics? Even worse. AI is becoming a weapon, literally. Countries are racing to develop AI-powered defense systems, surveillance tools, and cyber warfare capabilities. If Africa doesn't develop its own AI technologies, it won't just be left behind economically. It will be defenseless in the new era of global power struggles. And finally, culture. AI models are trained on data. The more data a region contributes, the more its perspectives are represented in AI-driven decision-making. If Africa isn't contributing to AI development, its languages, history, and cultural nuances will be filtered out. AI will shape the future, but it will be a future designed by and for the West and China. All of these sound depressing, I know, but I'd also like to point out that it's not all doom and gloom. Africa can still turn things around, but it needs to act fast. First, investment. African governments and businesses need to stop treating AI like some futuristic luxury and start treating it as a survival necessity. That means funding AI research, building tech hubs, and creating incentives for AI startups. Second, education. Africa needs AI-focused universities, research centers, and programs that train people at scale. Coding boot camps are great, but they're not enough. The continent needs world-class AI researchers, engineers, and data scientists. People who can build foundational systems, not just use pre-built tools. Third, infrastructure. Internet access, electricity, and computing power must be prioritized. Countries like Kenya and Nigeria have already started investing in better internet and cloud computing services, but that needs to scale across the continent. Fourth, data. Africa needs to start collecting and managing its own data. That means digitizing records, building national AI datasets, and making sure that African languages and cultures are represented in global AI models. And finally, collaboration. No single African country can do this alone. The continent needs regional partnerships, cross-border research initiatives, and a unified push for AI development. Imagine an African AI alliance where multiple countries pool resources to compete on a global scale. Africa isn't doomed to miss out on the AI revolution, but if it doesn't move fast, it won't just be left behind. It'll be locked out of the future entirely.